That takes care of the delegates, and now Norm's going to do the reps.
Well, because we have the process here is, for those of you who have not been here before, is that notwithstanding wherever we are on the agenda,
Yes.
at 7 o'clock, we call on our guest speaker. So rather than starting to get into the sign-ups for state rep and stuff like that, we're going to call on our guest speaker. I've known J.R. Hoell for a number of years. He was a former state representative. He's very active in the gun advocacy groups in the state. He has been a trainer at the 603 Alliance training for candidates in the past. Very influential. I think he happens to be an engineer in the real world, and he has graciously agreed to come and be our guest speaker. Some of you may know and may have read about some of his adventures with DCYF, the New Hampshire Division of Children and Family Services. And so I'd like to welcome JR to tell us about his adventures and what he experienced and what, if anything, we can do about it. JR?
Sure. Thank you, everybody. As Representative Silver said, I met him and some of the others. I want to thank you guys. It's a breath of fresh air to be up here and listen to Republicans actually supporting Republican values, which unfortunately is not as true in the rest of the state as I would like it. First of all, DCYF is not the department of, it's the Division of Children, Youth, and Families.
Yes.
I would argue it's appropriately named the Division of Youth, Children, and Families. That is their job. Their job is to literally, divide up families.
Wait, one second. Can everybody hear? Does he need a microphone? Everybody hear okay?
Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay. So, my experience with them, I had heard the horror stories. I had been on Children and Family Law in 2013 and 2014. I had heard dads come in and tell us horror stories of both DCYF and family courts. I said, it can't be that bad. It can't be as bad as I'm hearing these stories. And then I had a chance to experience firsthand. And it all started with our family got COVID in November. I had done an enormous amount of research on a drug that is used around the world, or a medicine used around the world, which is Ivermectin. And I had studied, 15, 20 medical journals. I had read the pharmaceutical information put out by Merck, the manufacturer of this. I knew enough about the drug that I could talk intelligently with most of the doctors that I was talking with. And it was a reasonably good form of medication, very low side effects. Whether it was a simple placebo effect or whether it was substantially more, I don't know. I can make a good argument that it works because it binds up the ACE2 receptors. I can make a good argument from a technical side why it's a good medicine to use to fight COVID. So we took it. Our family recovered fine. We're now off of it. And all of a sudden my son's having sleepless nights. Things aren't going well. He tells me he takes too much Tylenol. I'm like, that's a drug that is one of the ones we've discussed as a family that is you need to ask mom and dad about. I mean, even my older kids won't take ibuprofen without asking, let alone Tylenol. And Tylenol, for those who don't know, would never be allowed over the counter today if Johnson & Johnson wanted to bring it to the market. It is that dangerous a drug. It's a great drug. It's got lots of headaches, but it is the one drug that most people have in their cabinets that would be easy to create a liver failure and end someone's life. Okay? Somewhere north of 10 tablets for the average person could be dead. It's that, okay? Most people don't know it, heads up. Tylenol is one of the few things, just be careful. And when it was 3, I was concerned. When the story, he was really tired, became 10, I called poison control, because I thought that was the right thing to do. That's what we've been taught as parents. That's what loving parents do. They take care of their kids. And they said, go to the ER, and got my son, and we headed off to the ER. And they did all the blood work, and there's no evidence of any liver toxicity, no evidence of Tylenol, no evidence of anything that could be considered harm. And they're like, well, there's nothing wrong physically. The following week, and I told my nurse kind of the whole story about the ivermectin. She sent us home. Didn't order blood work, didn't send us to the emergency room, didn't do anything. She sent us home. And then 3 hours later, I get a phone call. You have to rush your son to the emergency room. He's going to die. And I'm explaining to the nurse, your analysis is fundamentally flawed. The half-life of this medication, okay, is somewhere between 24 and 48 hours, depending on what documents you read. Okay, we discontinued it more than 10 days ago. It's out of his system. And for those who don't understand half-life, every unit of time, half of what's remaining in your body goes away. I spent a lot of time talking to Dr. Strang about this over the last, 4 months of this ordeal. Anyway, I knew about the half-life at the time. And I'm like, discontinue it 10 days ago. We would not have technology today anywhere in the world to be able to find this in his bloodstream, period. It's just not going to be available. No, your son is experiencing Ivermectin coma toxicity. I'm like, he's not. So let's come up with some analysis, because it's not that. I don't know what it is. He's not sleeping well. Let's find out what he's not sleeping well. Is it hormones? Is it anxiety? Is it post-COVID fog? I don't know what it is, but it's not what you're saying it is as a parent. In fact, I still have the list in my wallet of all the things I was asking about at the time, because I thought it was important to have a discussion. I went through, hey, he's a teenager. Is there a sudden inrush of all sorts of hormones, and this is making life difficult? She wouldn't have it. She reported us to DCYF. I get the phone call 10 minutes later. Hi, this is so-and-so from DCYF. I need to see your son at the hospital immediately. He's fine. There's nothing wrong. No, I need to see him at the hospital. Okay. I guess you play the game for a little while because it's the right thing to do. Fine. Let me talk to my wife. I'll figure out what hospital. We'll head to the hospital. Meanwhile, I'm heading home. And then I get the second, well, it was actually a third phone call. She called me another time to confirm which hospital, and then it was a third phone call. I need you to take your minor age daughter there as well. And I'm like, click. Hair on the back of my neck stands up. We're not discussing that my minor age daughter is fine, right? There's no reason for her to be seen. This is, and for those who don't know, right, the emergency room is the one place, if you walk in, it's very difficult to get out, but they can do what's known as an emergency involuntary admission, an IEA, and they can grab you. And instantly, all the gears shifted, right? I changed course. I talked to a couple of attorneys real quickly. I made a flurry of phone calls. I actually counted. I had 145 phone calls that day on my phone, my cell phone. I made a lot of phone calls really quickly, and on the 10-minute drive home, I figured out a new plan. And my wife and my children left the state. Okay? I said, I love you. Sorry, it's a little emotional. I love you, you gotta go. And literally 15, 20 minutes later, the police were at my door trying to take the children. So, in the end, right, I'll jump to the end and I'll jump back for some of this, right? We had 4 court dates between December 9th when this started and when it was resolved on, I got the notification from the court on March 16th. For those who are Christians, that was the day of, I'm gonna mess up this Jewish holiday, Purim, I think, right?
Could be Purim, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, which is really cool. There's a huge spiritual significance to those, right? Because this is when Esther, right, went to the king and had the discussion, and Haman ends up hanged at the end of the court. But it's the celebration of that particular event. But that was the day we actually got the notification. It was signed on the 14th, but I didn't get it via the mail until the 16th, which was pretty cool. At the end of the day, the judge ruled, and I quote, right, there was no evidence of any neglect of any form, much less what was alleged by DCYF, unquote. Okay, that is in his order. That's how strongly worded. But it literally took 4 court dates, almost 20 hours in a courtroom to get there. And what I learned out of this was the judge ordered at our first opinion that our medical doctors would be allowed to be telephonically involved because it's hard to get a medical doctor to a courtroom because they have to take time and travel and whatever else to be able to testify. So he said that on December 16th. And then he said it again in another court order in January. But when we get to the court to actually have the preliminary hearing, something that legislatively and statutorily is due 7 days after this process starts, right? It's now almost 2 months for us, which was February 2nd. He listens to the nurse make the complaint, And out of the 3 hours we were allocated, an hour and 40 minutes into goes, I've already decided that there is evidence to proceed. So let's spend the rest of the time talking about what to do with your children until we can get to the next hearing. And I said, what? And my attorney objected. Literally, Dr. Strang is sitting in the bench outside the courtroom. He can't participate at all. He sat there for 3 hours, right? He sat there for 3 hours as a doctor, an emergency room doctor, someone who could easily discuss this, and the judge never allowed. Why is that? In family court, judges have complete control over the evidence. There are no rules of evidence like there are in a courtroom. So the judge can decide, and we've seen lots of issues here, the judge can decide, I don't like that evidence, I'm throwing it out. I like this hearsay evidence, I'm including it, and that's what the decision is made on. I was shocked. I had heard all this, but it's worse than I thought. So, other things I learned. DCYF staff will throw this over to legal as soon as they can, which is interesting. Neither DCYF staff nor legal are competent to actually go prosecute a case. I found this out. I've seen lots of disasters. They just want to mark up points. I found out afterward, they actually have a course on how to maximize the revenue for cases in their domain. Literally, I have a course on how to maximize the revenue, okay, as part of their training module. Is this what we should be hiring Child Protective Services for? Once a caseworker gets it over to legal, they know how to wash their hands of it because legal's managing it. And it goes through the legal process. In our case, I was given some good advice from a friend, and he said, you know, the longer this wait, the easier it is for you to argue that your son was never at risk of coma or death. Because it's one thing to be 24 hours later, it's another to be a week, it's another to be, right, it was almost 4 months to the day. But I can tell you, they had told, my son had seen a subsequent doctor within 24 hours of the ex parte order. The doctor said he was fine. They had a phone call, a recorded Zoom phone call with staff that we kept a copy of. And they ended their questions. They could have continued to ask questions, they chose not to. He was safe. Now granted, it was on the side of the road from a phone. I made it as difficult for them to get a hold of them as possible. It wasn't at a residence. But anyway, we jumped through a few hoops, but we could do a Zoom call from a phone on the side of a road at 7 p.m. But at the end of the day, the thing that allowed us to keep our children was they never grabbed them. Because what happens is DCYF kidnaps your children and then they own all the cards, and it's a hostage situation. They have the hostages, they can make all the demands. So, never let, I mean, if you have any reason that you believe the children are in danger, then take care of it on your own. Get them to a doctor you trust, get them the medical help, whatever, get them counseling, whatever is important, right? But once they go into DCYF, you've lost the battle. So, anyway, that was the lessons I had heard, because I had sat on children and family law. I did not realize how it was worse than I had ever heard, and that family court is so corrupt that they will literally rule against you before you can even share your side of the story. And the judge started there, and for those who are conservative Christians, I spent a lot of time in Luke. There's a chapter about an unrighteous judge. I think it's 18 if I recall. And he went from someone who literally wrote a court order, you can't administer ivermectin in any form. That was one of the first things he said, to, you're right, this is a safe and harmless drug that may have some potential. There's no reason you should be held accountable for it. It went that far. And I looked up his voting record. He's not alive. I can tell you that. So I had a judge who started politically at the far end of the spectrum, and in 4 court hearings eventually got there. I think it was prayer only. But at the important part of that was, God was faithful and took care of this, and our children are safe. Don't trust the state with your children. And there's, since this, I've had 8 families call me since March 14th who are being harassed by DCYF on cases as innocent as whether it's ivermectin in one case. I saw a Facebook post about your children and that you gave your children ivermectin, literally, or you missed a doctor's appointment in another, okay? the insanity continues. So at some level, there needs to be some reform. God willing, that will be in the next legislative. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to those, several of you reached out during this ordeal and helped out and whatever.
We take some questions?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, sure.
JR, you mentioned, some of us are already acquainted because we've heard stories about the horror that the family court system is in this state.
Yep.
This is not necessarily the case in all 50 states. This is the bottom of the barrel here. Now let me ask you. You mentioned that the judge had, to put it nicely, wide latitude as to what he was going to accept and not accept. Did you have the right of discovery?
I did have, so there is in statute a right of discovery for DCYF matters. It is that the state should turn over all documentation 5 days prior, and if they don't turn over all documentation 5 days prior, you are allowed, in fact, to ask for an extension of the hearing to another date. So you're allowed to postpone it. My attorney recommended we not do that for various reasons. More because it was easier to argue with the judge that the state was again failing to comply with law, and we started a case of those. But he figured, he knew the judge well enough to know that the judge was going to get upset if we just blew off another 3-day, or in the final court hearing, another 2-day scheduled court hearing, because it takes a lot of time to get 2 days on the docket for those, 2 full days. But what I did learn, and it's clear, unlike criminal, it's not just about discovery, which is the point you were making. The rules of evidence are completely arbitrary and up to the judge. And we would be much better off if we set the standard like you would in a criminal court, where the rules of evidence don't allow things like hearsay and double hearsay and all sorts of nastiness. And the other?
I have a question.
Sure.
How much did this cost you in legal fees?
Legal fees and expert witness fees were almost $60,000. Okay, and 4 months of so I work for a consulting company that I'm part owner in, and 4 months of my life where I was working 10 to 15 hours a week. So there was a salary loss as well, because I wasn't busy doing what I normally do. I was busy researching legal documents and helping write briefs and other things. Yes, ma'am.
Is there any recourse? Like how you can't?
Well, yes, there is. There's a legislative recourse, which is why I am now a candidate, or will be as of tomorrow. I'm running again. But there's also.
How about running for governor?
Chrissy-O.
We have some good candidates on the list for governor, actually. And I think there's a way. I'm wondering whether at the end of the day, our current governor will actually get a majority out of the primary. I really wonder. He may still win, but he may win with less than, right, under a plurality type clause, because I think there's now 5 candidates. And if the sitting governor can't break 50% in his own party primary, that's not a good sign. So maybe he had people are starting to realize what has happened, because he's wavered pretty far to the left. I've run for state rep because that's a job I can do time-wise and still support my family. So I've been asked for the last couple of months since this thing started to run for governor, and I can't do that and actually provide for them. Yes, ma'am.
How long was your wife and your children away from you?
So the ex parte order that started on December 9th, okay, the statute says 7 days they need to have a hearing to have a discussion about it. So we had a hearing on the 16th. At that point, the ex parte order was put on pause about the kids, and believe it or not, my kids were put into NCIC, the National Instant Criminal
Crime
Index, as missing children, which meant if either my wife or I were with our children, we would be accused of kidnapping. And until that was removed, and I had confirmed that with my chief of police, I wasn't willing to have my wife come back in the state, because she could have been facing yet a different criminal. I mean, they stacked charges. So I had to make sure that they were off of the NCIC database. I have a copy of it's called a BOLO, it'll be on the lookout, a BOLO alert. It's Thursday night, December 9th, and at 9:30 I get a phone call from a reporter. And I'm like, I get phone calls at strange times, but I don't typically get phone calls after 8 from reporters. I'll take the phone call. And he was kind enough to say, is everything okay? I just heard this. And I said, well, it doesn't need to be discussed because this was at a point where we were keeping it confidential. Yes, everything's fine. The state is trying to take my kids. That's all I told them. But fortunately, I learned about it from a reporter who wanted to know what the heck was going on. And the next morning they were put into NCIC or something. So the state can be weaponized. It happens in divorces. Family court is a great place, a very fertile ground to allow things like this to happen, and we need to fix it because it affects everything from divorces to children and family related stuff, and it's the one area where state has kind of creeps inside of the walls of your house and can interfere at a significant level, and they own all the cards. So, yes, sir.
This is a shocking story to hear this. It sounds like Soviet Union type stuff. How did we, I mean, I like to think that Granite State is the free state, right? How did this end up happening to get to this point here in New Hampshire?
So, it's evolved that way over a number of years. Little changes. As I mentioned before, in that one bill, we made a couple of changes to allow parents to disclose stuff. Well, there was a bunch of bills that went through a committee called Children and Family Law, and the chairman of that committee, who voted against Representative Terry's parental rights bill, managed to have all those killed somehow. Guess what? We need somebody in Children and Family Law that's going to say, guess what? We're going to stand up for the family. We're going to put the family ahead of government. The family is the smallest unit of civil society, okay? It's down below community, it's down below church, right? It is the foundation of our society. And if an offense is going on that's great enough to involve the state, likely it's criminal in nature, okay? You don't need to call DCYF if there is physical or sexual abuse of a child. It's a criminal matter. Call the police. I mean, you're better off at least that there you have for the first time some level, and I don't want to call the police, but you have at least some level of rules of evidence that are in your favor.
Due process.
Due process. In DCYF, there's none of that. And honestly, why is DCYF getting involved unless it's a criminal offense anyway? I mean, they get to interfere, whether it's education neglect. I'm aware of several of those right now that are going on. And the education neglect one was the parent didn't file the form with the state or with the school in time between when they pulled their kids out of school and when they filed the paperwork and they were accused of truancy, and DCYF said you're keeping your kids from school and came after them. This is the level of interference in families. It's got to stop. In 2016, there was a report done for homeschooling families. By the way, we are one. And of the 600 cases of education neglect, 572, if I can go from memory, 572 were unfounded, which meant 28 out of 600, or less than 5% of the cases, warranted them to be involved. So in the private world, when you have a 95% failure rate, typically someone in management says, we got to fix this. This is a problem. Well, it's time to fix this. One more question. Sorry, go ahead.
I have two.
Okay.
First, it appears that there are thousands of parents in this state whose children, underage children, smoke marijuana, take cocaine or crack or other illegal substances.
Yep.
So the first question would be, I've never heard of any of those parents being harassed like you were. Have you?
So there's an interesting Supreme Court case that came up. A family and I only use the term unsuitable parents, but parents who were making poor choices. Both were strung out on various types of medication. Out of it, one of the kids died. It was a fentanyl overdose. So the state stepped in, right, and grabbed the kids. And then a relative tried to get guardianship and adopt these children. One would think that's a good idea. The relative was out of state. Relative lives in Illinois. That relative actually has flown in numerous times for all the legal things and all whatever. So this person won the Supreme Court case. DCYF should give the children over. She's been assigned guardianship, but she still hasn't seen her whatever, great niece and great nephew or something. So They fight to keep possession because there's money, a money stream for all the kids that are in the system.
Yeah.
Okay, so that kind of answers your question. Yes, there are issues. They do that, but they don't have a good, what I would call a triage unit. Right? From an engineering standpoint or a medical standpoint, you triage the issue and you figure out this is a severe one, this isn't. Their triage system is fundamentally flawed because you can't assign the same level of risk for some of the things that are going on. Education neglect should be like way down on the list, right? Granted, the phone call that started this from my nurse, which was over the top, I believe, was risk of coma or death is a strong, compelling reason to get involved immediately type thing. But with that said, 24 hours later, they had sufficient evidence to close the case as unfounded because another doctor had seen him and said, this is impossible. None of the information is there. And we have the health records from the week before when he was at the ER that are good enough to show that there was no evidence of any medical harm. So, thank you for everybody. Oh. Oh, sorry. She pointed out. So my kids were only gone for about 8 days. She did ask. I never answered the question. So, yeah, the 17th they were able to come back. And actually, they came. Sorry, the 10th they actually had to drive back into the state to see a doctor so that we could have another doctor, another New Hampshire doctor, see my son. And then my wife and children drove back out of state to spend time with friends and relatives. And then they drove back a week later on the 17th after the NCIC was lifted.
Final question, where are you running for the reps?
In Dunbarton. So Dunbarton and Hooksett are a new district, and it looks like I'm going to run in Dunbarton. There's a floterial as well. Dunbarton, Hooksett, Allentown, and Epsom.
Was there any effort to seek an extradition order for your family when they were out?
They did not go that far.
They didn't pursue you beyond the state lines?
No, but they did actually flirt with the idea of doing an Amber Alert for my children. Fortunately, my police chief, former police chief, he has since retired, but he knew me well enough to say this is complete nonsense and help me shut that down. Sometimes local chiefs who know you well enough personally can do something like that. Otherwise, it probably would have been an Amber Alert.
DCYF oversees foster care.
Yes.
Which is also tied to the Savannah Center and everything.
Yes, there's some
There's some
issues.
serious issues there.
Yep. So if
Follow the money.
let me leave you a cell phone number if you want to follow up with me after, because you have a horror story or you know of a horror story that needs to be fixed. I want to make sure we can start to collect these and whatever. So let me give you my cell phone number. It's 603-315-9002. I know these two guys have it. They can make sure you have it if you need to follow up afterwards. 315-9002. And get a hold of me. There's no voicemail. I got rid of that years ago. But send me a text or something to say, hey, I met you at the Belknap meeting. And we can get together and talk.
Thanks for
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
Crop TV.